will go next.
Hi, I am Christensen. I'm a teacher here in Lincoln. I teach over at Sheridan. And my oldest son also goes to Sheridan. He's a kindergartner over there. I live in the neighborhood. I just live over on 23rd Street. So this also feels like my community because my kids are here all the time on the playground and we live in this area, and so this just feels really good to be visiting with you guys tonight. I went to UNL. I got my bachelor's in elementary and special education, and I'm currently going to UNL for my master's in education administration. Started with LPS in 2016. Started in special education, taught that for several years, and then moved over to academic intervention, which is what I teach now. So I get to do small groups of reading and math during the day and teach first through fifth graders. So it's really fun to get kind of the difference in personalities in kids between first grade and fifth grade. It's really always different, always exciting. Got into the race for the State Board of Education, really was noticing the effects of the teacher shortage crisis, the sub shortage, our para shortage, and the toll that it was taking on teachers and on our students. And seeing that and experiencing it firsthand. We've been really fortunate in Lincoln to have kind of avoided the teacher shortage for the most part in regards to how the other state or other cities across the state is faring, but we really have experienced the sub shortage and the para shortage, and that's district wide, and that really does have a big effect on student outcomes. And being an intervention teacher, I am outcome focused, and we want our students to excel in reading and in math, and when we don't have those experienced educators in the classroom and helping out with the teachers, then that really does make a big difference. And so that's going to be one of my top focuses, is how we can help to mitigate the staff, especially teacher shortage that we have, and looking at creative ways that we can keep our teachers in the classrooms and recruit some good high quality candidates. Our teacher training programs are kind of, experiencing a decrease as well in the numbers of students that are enrolling in these programs, and so looking at ways that we can get people interested in education again to get those high quality educators into the field. And like I said before, looking at how students are performing, especially in reading and math, is high priority for me. That's been my whole career, is improving student outcomes in reading and math, and it's imperative that we are raising good readers and are raising proficient mathematicians so that they can continue on into middle and high school to be strong in those skills, and then be able to move out into post-secondary in whichever field that they choose, but that they have that strong foundation to be successful in their life. So that's kind of my two main priorities, is the teacher and staff retention and recruitment, and student proficiency in those high academic areas. So thank you for letting me be here tonight. I'm excited to be here.
Hi there, same. Very grateful to be able to be here tonight. Ingrid said this is the first time that they've had two candidates, so thank you for welcoming both of us. And I think we agree on a lot. But my name is Liz Davids, and I was born here in Lincoln, and then my parents got a job offer in Reno, Nevada, and so I grew up in Reno, Nevada, was public school my entire childhood, had a wonderful public school experience, came back to be a Husker, because I came back in 1998, so we were at the pinnacle of our football game, and graduated in 2002 with a bachelor's degree in piano performance, and met my husband. So we've raised our kids here, and it's a wonderful place to live. Do miss my family. They're a little bit far away, but Lincoln's my home. And for the past 3 years, I've been going to the State Board of Education meetings and the LPS board meetings, and making a lot of connections with teachers and administrators and staff members, understanding the issues, and really reaching out. I was making a list of all the people. I'm a pen and paper kind of gal, so these notebooks are filled up with conversations that I've been having with people for the past 8 months. I've really endeavored to make it my mission. When I was going to the state board and the LPS meetings, what I found was no matter how many of us went, no matter how many of us agreed on the same subject, the board members didn't have to listen to us if they had a preconceived political ideology that they were not going to budge from. And so when even when surveys came back with 90% of people thinking one thing, they decided they were going to do the other thing. So after listening to people for 3 years, I decided I want to be a representative of the public. I want to meet the people in my district and understand the needs and the concerns. I was talking to the principal here about Prescott's demographic makeup is so different than the school that I volunteer at. I'm up in the north central area around Superior and 27th, and once a week I'm at Campbell Elementary School, and so I noticed on the door there was only English coming into this school, but at Campbell Elementary School there's like 7 languages on the doors and on the flyers that go home, and so it's wonderful to have a diverse group of students, and every school is different. So I've made it my goal to talk to as many people as possible, as many teachers, as many staff members, as many principals and NSCA staff and NASB staff, and just really there's a lot of similar things that I'm hearing as what Kristen's hearing, right? Teachers are overburdened, they're overwhelmed, they're underpaid, and there's a lot of teacher shortage crisis. What I'm hearing a lot of as I talk to individual people is that a lot of it is the bureaucratic processes that are actually shooting us in the foot. So for instance, just talked to a high school principal the other day. They have a French teacher who was born in France, got her bachelor's degree in France, had taught in Arizona for 10 years, but our Department of Education does not recognize the bachelor's degree in France or the 10 years that she taught in Arizona. So that French teacher can be in a Nebraska school, but also in the same classroom, they have to have a certified Nebraska teacher so that they're paying for 2 teachers when they just need the 1 French teacher. So it's things like that where I just see a lot of our processes are actually shooting us in the foot. In Western Nebraska, we can cross over to Colorado and teach with a teacher's certificate from Nebraska. Colorado will accept that, no problem. But for a Coloradan to come into Nebraska, there's all these processes that they have to jump through the hoop. And if you've taught for a number of years, you might find that insulting, and you might decide to go work at Starbucks or Menards or someplace else and not go through the hassle of student teaching and taking all these credit hours. Talked to a Malcolm student teacher, Malcolm teacher who had taught in Nebraska and then moved to Minnesota for 5 years, taught there. But when he came back to Nebraska, it wasn't good enough. So he was going to have to student teach and then pay for 16 credit hours. So again, I think there's a lot of processes that are actually shooting us in the foot. It's not necessarily that there aren't people out there that are willing. I had a friend who applied December 3rd to be a substitute teacher, and the system, the online computer system, kept her from being able, it wouldn't accept her phone number for 3 months. She's trying and they're trying and it wouldn't accept her phone number, and then finally she got in, and we learned that her school district only has once a month substitute approval meetings. So she was ready to sub in December 3rd, and yet she hasn't been able to sub at all this semester, even though she has a Nebraska teacher certification and she has taught in Nebraska schools. There's just system. There's system in the way of getting good teachers in the classrooms and keeping them in the classrooms. So that's a lot of what I'm hearing from the doors. I'm hearing a lot of people frustrated with the system, the bureaucracy, the red tape that gets in the way of good people being in the classrooms. So I'd like to help streamline the bureaucratic process, from talking with all these people, from interpreters to psychologists to staff members to teachers and paras. I just talked to a para, special ed para in one of our middle schools. I'm not sure I'm at liberty to say which one, and she said they're cutting half of the para's jobs, and it's based on budget. And so my heart is that as many budget cuts as possible would be as far away from the classroom as possible without those direct student contacts. So a lot of the system needs some shoring up and some help with the bureaucratic processes. So that's why I'm here.
So I don't have any specific questions. I figured just, if you had a question for either one, or if you want for both of them to answer the same question, just go right ahead. I mean, we're all parents, so obviously, this affects us in various ways, and we want to know, I guess basically the question is, why should we vote for you? But we all have like different reasons of why we want a specific candidate, so feel free just to ask the question.
I have a question. Kristin, you talked about your experience in LPS.
Mm-hmm.
I was busy helping kiddos.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I'm curious, can you share a little bit about your experience and how you work outside of your volunteer hours? What has been your professional credentials that you think make you qualified to serve in this position?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so I have a bachelor's degree in piano performance from the university, and I have 5 kids, and my oldest is mildly autistic, so we went through a lot of creative solutions for him. He went to the Everett preschool, the speech and language preschool for 2 years. That was a great experience. And then at that point, we brought him home to homeschool so he could have some extra time to get his feet under him and not go through it's difficult being a kid anyway, and so we wanted to give him some extra time. And that has just been a wonderful experience for him. And so then when he became a junior or sophomore, we applied for the LPS and the SCC hybrid program, the Career Academy. And so he went into the Career Academy, he studied under Lauren Stara, he had a great experience in the residential construction pathway. He loved it. He's a hands-on kid. He's not a bookworm kid, so that was still a struggle, but he's a hands-on kid, and so that was really a beautiful partnership with a home-educated family and the LPS program. I love that they collaborate and partner really well. So I'm not a teacher. I never call myself a teacher. I don't have a teacher's certificate. I'm an educator. I'm a home educator, and I think there's a benefit to having a lot of different perspectives on the board. Right now we have Jacqueline Morrison, who's a lawyer from Omaha. We have Kirk Penner, who's been a local school board person, and so there's educators and then there's non-educators, and I think that's what we see on the LPS board too, a lot of different partnerships with different perspectives. So thanks for the question.
For Kristin, you had mentioned the issue with shortage of teachers, paras, and that you were studying ideas for how to bring them back and get more into the classroom. Can you share some of those with us?
Yeah, so one big way that I've been looking into is how we can include more leadership roles within the building. Right now, a lot of our buildings just have the administrators, so they might have the principal, an assistant principal, or a coordinator, but there aren't often a lot of ways to increase leadership roles within a building without going into an administrator role. So looking at ways that we can expand a mentorship program, or looking at ways that we can expand team leader roles, so that our teachers are raising their salary and also feeling like they are getting some of that leadership experience or role that they sometimes are looking for. It kind of fits best of both worlds there. So especially with like a mentorship program that helps our novice new first year teachers and gives that community aspect and community building within a building, to have our veteran teachers pair with a new teacher. Then it gives our veteran teachers some salary advancement, and it gives our new teachers some of that experience to learn from someone that's been doing it for a while. So just looking at some leadership roles, creativity within our buildings and within our districts. Since the state board doesn't have authority over salaries, that's a tax thing that comes from districts and state level. So state board can't say, I'm gonna increase teacher salaries X amount each year. Then the state board has to look at creative ways of reducing workload, looking at streamlining some of the standards that we're setting and how those are addressed, and then also can advocate and increase some leadership roles within the building. Thank you for the question.
And they have the new program that, I think, was it $1 million grant that was a short-term grant, but it was to help like paras become teachers and work through that. And do you know anything about that? Because I don't know from a firsthand experience how that's going, but I've heard people are loving the program.
It's already been established. Paras are able to take summer courses and then be able to be a certified teacher through UNL, partnering with LPS. I know a teacher or a para currently that works over at Everett, and she's going through that right now. So by the end of the summer, she'll be able to be a certified special ed teacher in LPS. And she already has a position over at Everett. So she was really excited to be able to go through that program, and then be able to help a school that has special education needs. So yeah, it's a really exciting partnership and program that paras are able to go through to kind of get into teacher roles a little bit quicker.
One of the things I learned about too, speaking of teacher shortage crisis, is from the president of NERCSA, the Nebraska Community Rural Schools Association. Knocked on his door, just happened to be his door, and he was talking about the transitional program that UNK has. So online, so someone who's a business leader in the community, they probably don't want to go back and get a bachelor's in education. So there's a transitional program. So if you're a successful business person, you're a successful community leader, and you don't want to go through 4 years of teacher education college, you can get this, it sounds like a provisional teacher certificate, and sort of there's a system to get you teaching with supervision, with not a full teacher certificate, because we don't want to insult someone who went and did 4 years of teacher's college, but also there's a transitionary program. So I've talked to a lot of people, again, who are successful in the community and want to go give back and teach maybe a business class at the high school because they're a successful business person, and again, the bureaucracy gets in the way. So I hadn't even heard about the UNK program. As soon as I posted online about it, someone said, oh yeah, Creighton University does that too. And so I think there's a lot of, actually, there's probably more options out there that are maybe small and niche programs that we just don't have a robust conversation about. And I think maybe if we had more community people that had access to those conversations, they could bring their expertise into our classrooms. And we all know that kids benefit, when someone's in there that's a quality person that loves what they do, and then they get to teach about it, it works. It's win-win for everyone. Oh, this little one's so cute.
It sounds like some of the things that the board is responsible for includes licensing, but other than that, I don't know what is the state board responsible for? Is there some list somewhere, or?
There is, yep. If you go to the Nebraska Department of Education website, there's a whole list of things that they are responsible for and have jurisdiction over, but mostly it's setting policy for schools across the state. So they set like the statewide policy, and then they give authority to local school boards to kind of set their policy underneath that umbrella. They also give authority to the state commissioner, who's like the state superintendent of schools, to be able to provide funding for certain programs that they've started, to like act within his duties. The state board kind of allows that. So they're kind of like it's kind of like the legislature for schools, basically, but it doesn't really deal with funding. It's kind of the big difference. So they're like the umbrella, and then local school boards are underneath in their local communities.
And when I talked to Dr. Macher, the education commissioner, he was talking also about the regulatory and the ranking system. So in Nebraska, we have a ranking system of excellent, great, good, and needs support to improve. And so they determine what are the parameters for that for each school district. And pretty much they don't micromanage school districts until you rank at the lowest ranking, which is needs support to improve. So for instance, I was at a state board meeting when Schuyler was coming out of that category, the needs support to improve, and they were proving themselves that they had improved out of that ranking, and there was a huge celebration because no school district wants to be micromanaged by the State Board of Education. So those parameters of how do we judge that schools are doing well and succeeding and that their kids are succeeding is really important. And so that's definitely part of it too, is like how do we judge? And there's influence on teachers' colleges for that certification. What does a teachers' college require that that Nebraska's teachers will be certified by? So there's that aspect too.
I would just also be curious of either of your opinions on public funds for private schools and charter schools as opposed to public schools.
Go ahead.
Okay. I want every student to have an opportunity to be where they thrive, and so it's my understanding, I think it was 1402 that was just passed, and last year,
753.
Thank you, I was thinking those three numbers somewhere. So it's my understanding that those public funds go to a scholarship fund for mostly underprivileged, minority, poverty-stricken people in inner city Omaha. So when I talk to those kids and I talk to those families, and I know that there's 500 families on a waiting list for scholarships, my heart goes out to the single mom who's working 3 jobs and can't afford to move into a different school district. So I haven't seen a graphic or a meme to show you yet, but the 1402 bill that was passed, and according to my numbers, there are 475,000 students in Nebraska right now, and so $10 million was what was allocated in 1402 that just passed, and $10 million compared to 475,000 students across Nebraska, that roughly a school district pays about $10,000 per pupil. $10 million compared to that number is less than 1%. And so my heart is that less than 1% of our entire state budget for public school funding going to a fund that helps mostly the most vulnerable, most kids that are stuck in broken schools, failing schools, my heart goes towards them. So I feel like less than 1% of our entire state budget for public school funding, it's okay with me if it goes into a private school fund that those kids can access.
I have a follow-up to that. Okay, so when we talk about the challenges with hiring and retention, $10 million could probably go a long way to maintaining staff, and we're keeping staff here. Not necessarily our building, not saying we improvement, we're great.
You guys are great.
I figured you were a teacher. I sense the teacher. You handled those kids so well.
I'm curious though, what do you see as the real benefit redirecting funds that could be going to improving those schools away from that?
Did you want to answer the first question first, or are we good?
Go ahead, however you want to handle that.
I feel like my answer is a lot simpler. I am a strong advocate for ensuring that our public schools have what they need. And kind of to piggyback on your question, it's taking away funds when we could be allocating that to strengthening our school system. When our schools, some of our districts across the state are hurting, we are losing teachers. We can't find paras for a lot of our buildings, and so if we could redirect those funds to support what we need, instead of offering it to private schools, which is unconstitutional, then we could do a lot of good with $10 million a year. So to simply put, I'm an advocate for keeping public dollars in public education.
And I do have a question about the constitutionality, and I think that the Nebraska Supreme Court, and they're going to sort that out. I would say, talking to a middle school science teacher here that throws away the entire curriculum every year, I'd like to see the funds that we already have used more efficiently. I think we all have family budgets, that the budget is the budget, and if we have to trim the fat, then we have to trim the fat. So when I talk to people, my good friend that taught at an LPS middle school, she taught middle school math for 5 years, and she said there are 7 math curriculum administrators sitting in the district office who get to tell me what to do, but I've never met a single one of them, and they've never come into my classroom for 5 years. And so that, to me, again, is there's a lot of heavy-handedness at the top, and the people who are in the classrooms don't often get to set the point system for their school. Of course, they don't get to set the point system for their school, but then they're regulated. So the middle school that's losing half of their sped paras, I don't think it's that the district can't afford those sped paras. I think it's that the people who are farthest away from the classroom get to make the point system. And I think the State Board of Education could influence that. Certainly, yeah, there's no taxing authority or anything like that. We can't just say like, yeah, everybody's teachers are gonna get paid more, everybody's paras are gonna get paid more. But I think there's some influence, and maybe that comes to the regulatory process of ranking school districts, that we can say the budget cuts need to happen as far away from the classroom as possible, not the paras, not the staff, not the teachers. And I think there are options that might require some creative solutions, but that those who get to make the decisions often aren't willing to take a look at the creative solutions.
I have a question, and I'm sorry, with me interpreting, I think I'm missing some of it, so you might have already said this, but with the money going to private schools, let me see, what's my question? And I think you might have answered this actually now that I think about it, but if we want, okay, the reasoning for the scholarships, that's what they're calling it, is so that people who are at districts that are failing will have the option to send their children elsewhere. But why wouldn't we push for investing that money into that school district so that all those children are served rather than the ones that are picked for the scholarships.
Yeah, and that's not my specialty.
Okay.
Yeah, sure, with the State Board of Education, like, that's not what they do, that's what the legislature does. But again, I think what we're seeing is that administration gets to make the rules, and administration isn't always using money most efficiently. And so there is an LPS meeting on Thursday at the noon hour, like on Zoom, so I'm interested in hearing what they have to say. It's certainly, I think we all want our public schools to be as robust and as thriving as possible, and so money is part of the answer, but I think there's a lot of factors. I think there's decision making, and there's keeping the best people, getting the best people through the door, and I think there's a lot of processes, bureaucratic processes that play into that as well. So like the high school that has the French teacher but has to pay another teacher to be in the same room. So I think there's some streamlining that can help us save money too.
And that I agree with, because, so I moved here from Georgia, I'm actually a certified teacher, and this was really funny because funny to me, the Nebraska State Education, they made me take a diversity course, because I guess that's part of the requirement for Nebraska teachers, which I understand it for Nebraska teachers, but I was sort of like, I'm coming from Savannah, Georgia, where it's, I don't know, anyway, so.
It's not exactly a small town.
No,
Yeah.
well, and it's like the diversity there, you know, I'm from a different country, I've lived in like 5 different states here. It was just sort of like, that was a hurdle, like having to jump to become certified here, instead of just being able to, yeah, anyway.
Well, and I know that,
What would you suggest to change?
sorry?
What would you suggest for changes to make it broader, to welcome people, or like just make it easier to become a teacher, or what?
There's a lot that can be done online. I think instead of in person, there's a lot of details that would need to be worked out. And I honestly, it sounds like a politician answer, but I wouldn't know all the details until I got on the board. But I think there's a lot of modernizing. Our policies are from the 80s. So what worked in 1980 doesn't necessarily work in 2024. But again, if Colorado teachers, if we can go to Colorado and teach, no problem. I just don't understand why Colorado teachers can't be welcomed here. There's so many people who move into this state because their spouse is in the military, or they're going to be here for 3 years because their spouse is in a UNMC program, or they're in a short-term program. I spoke to a lot of Nigerians yesterday, and they're the spouse is at UNL studying engineering. A lot of them are doing engineering, but God bless them, because that's not my specialty. And so, are we welcoming to the people who are going to be here for a year, here for 3 years? And we need that reciprocity. We're not super welcoming. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. So I guess streamlining the bureaucracy. I know last year the board got rid of the praxis, the general knowledge praxis test. And so that's another, taking away barriers for good quality teachers to get in the classroom. And so not every teacher is a great test taker. So if you're a wonderful teacher, why shouldn't we have you in the classroom and prevent, again, that barrier?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, there's a lot of processes that I have gone through to be certified, but it's different for everybody. And so I'm just not an expert yet on all of the different ways that people can become certified as a teacher. So that's a great question. And one that, as you know, we would get into board membership that I would certainly need to learn more about is I know there's like 6 listed in our certification rule for the state that was just updated earlier this year. And so some of them are working on a provisional license while you get some of your requirements taken care of. Some of them are, if a district is seeking you, then you can be provisionally certified while you're working on your requirements. And so there's a whole host of ways that a person can become a teacher in the classroom. But the specifics of all of them, I just am not an expert on yet. So I'm sorry, that's a great question, and one that needs to be, that I need to explore more.
I talked to someone at their door, and he was saying, why can't a teacher's certificate go dormant the same way a lawyer's provisional, their license would go dormant? And so he said, if you're a lawyer and then you move out of state, or, you know, your certificate can go dormant and then you pay $75 and you move back to Nebraska. You know, I think there's a lot of different ways that we could look at being creative, and so that the process is not insulting to someone who, I mean, this Malcolm teacher had taught in Nebraska, moved to Minnesota, taught in Minnesota, moved back to Nebraska, and had to recertify. And so in my mind, I feel like that's kind of a kick in the gut when you paid the money to go to school here and get your certificate, and then you have been teaching, and then you come back in and it's not good enough. So I don't think we want to turn teachers away at the door just to say, well, our processes are so much more important than other states. So, because people will go to other states. We've got Western Nebraska, they'll go to Colorado. We've got Eastern Nebraska, they might go to Iowa. So we want to keep good people in the classroom as much as possible.
Does anyone have a sense of how many teachers are having that trouble getting certified? Is it hundreds? Is it like, are there 1,000 people waiting outside the door? Is there any sense of how many it is?
I mean, I don't have an answer to that. I would guess it's not in the thousands.
Yeah, okay.
My guess would be maybe in the low hundreds, but
Okay.
I really haven't.
It seems like a
I
low-
don't hear that very
Okay.
often,
It
to
seems
be
like a low
honest.
number to me in the big picture.
As a teacher that has been in the classroom for 9 years, I've never heard it. So I don't know. And maybe I'm just not talking about the right people.
Do you
But
think the bigger issue is the attrition that public schools are facing? And do you
Yes.
think that a solution is also just working to incentivize them to stay instead of, I mean, I
Yes.
know you mentioned teachers leaving, and I know you threw out some examples like going to Starbucks or going to work at Menards. I don't know any teachers that have left the profession that have gone to a job like that, where they're working hourly and not on a salary without benefits, and I think for a lot of people that is a driving factor to stay in education. But I don't know if you have any other ideas about specifically stopping the attrition instead of working on certifying people that are maybe not easily certified.
Yeah.
Instead,
Yeah.
just any ideas in general about why retention maybe is an easier focus, or is it more difficult? I don't know.
So in my experience in the classroom and talking to other certified teachers that have been in our buildings, a few of the big things that are causing that burnout and teachers to leave or retire early is things like student behavior, adding things to our plate without either more compensation or removing things from our plate. The community support has changed over the last handful of years, and the lack of respect of educators just isn't felt like it was maybe 5 years ago. And so those are kind of the big things that I'm hearing, that I'm feeling, that my school is experiencing in keeping our educators, and I know that's being felt across LPS. So I know LPS is doing things, taking initiative, like looking at student behavior and how we can kind of streamline the processes for the upcoming school years. Looking at how we can support our teachers in their plan time and making sure they have a dedicated plan time and a dedicated lunch where they're not being asked to do other things. Looking at how we can build up that community support again, and how we can make sure that we're trusting our teachers and trusting our librarians to make the best decisions for our students, because we are the trained professionals. And so those are some things that, as an educator, as a teacher that has the experience in the classroom, that I would bring to the state board. Is I know what it feels like to be in these experiences. I know what we're asking our teachers to do. I know what our students are needing and how our parents are feeling, and I am a parent of a student in a public school. And so those kind of three big things are what we would really need to be focusing on, is student behavior across the state, looking at how we are, adequately supporting our teachers and what we're asking them to do, and rallying that support in the community, because our teachers are not feeling supported and respected, and it's hurting the profession.
And I love your mentoring idea. That is fabulous. And I promise I won't steal it. It's all yours. It's all yours. You heard it here. And I talked to a Campbell teacher who's been there 18 years, and she was just like, in the beginning, there was so much parent support. If I called home, mom was right there, and she was, okay, I'm gonna talk to my student after school about their behavior. And she just said, COVID has changed a lot. COVID has changed a lot of parent support, parents interaction, so certainly we need to build that back up. Ingrid was talking about that too. It's just, you know, people are used to being able to say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to commit to that anymore. And so there's a lot that's changed in the culture. I think too, I was recommended to talk to John Campen, who's the Plattsmouth Middle School principal, and he was just talking about, they brought detention back. Shocker, their behavior issues went down like 80% because it was, hey, if you get a detention slip, you go to the office, you call your mom and say, I got detention today. And so they knew that at the beginning that they'd be staying after school to staff the detention, but they saw behavior go down dramatically. Now that's one school, but they tried something new and they saw it improved behavior dramatically. I know LPS has really curbed cell phones. They've also seen behavior increase in positive ways dramatically. So I think that there's definitely things they're trying. I think Grand Island is trying that too and also having the same effect. And then we've got situations like Schuyler just had 50 people decide they're not coming back. And so there's a wide variety of issues that require a wide variety of solutions, but I think it is, yes, let's support our teachers. John Campen had so many ideas about how to build a community in a school. There was a dad's program and there was a mom's program. It sounded like something I wanted to be a part of. So I think there's so many ways that the state board can influence those things, can provide resources, can say, you know, we'll pay for this broad program over here and then you can have access to it because the state has paid for it and individual school districts don't have to. Half of the NDE employees actually work for vocational rehab, which was news to me. When I started running for this, I did not know that. My son has also benefited from vocational rehab and working with them. So that's an experience that I never thought I would have, but it's been a good experience to have just kind of how that inner working goes and understanding a lot of that too. So another thing the state board does is they do the disciplinary processes for teachers that need discipline outside of their local school district. So that's something that I know that is part of their job, but I'm sure it's not their most enjoyable part of their job, and I'm not sure what the details look like, but there's a lot of things they do, and I think there's a lot of ways they can influence, even though, yeah, there's no taxing authority. They can't say everybody gets a raise, but there's a lot of influence they can have.
You had mentioned before, I was just confused and I let the conversation on this keep on going, but a teacher who threw out the science curriculum, and I'm just wondering, with the board, as a part of it's not curriculum, the board sets standards, right? The board does not set the curriculum.
Right.
So that was a district issue where
Yeah, so for my part, it was a waste of funding if 4 years in a row you're throwing out the science curriculum every year for 4 years in a row. And they were lamenting that too, so. What's that?
I said, I'm sure their principal would love to hear that.
Yes, and again, I never know how much I'm at liberty to say, and so it's one of those things where it's not gonna say the particular teacher at the particular middle school, but yeah, it's a challenge. There's a lot of challenges in education these days, and a lot of things we agree on. Our teachers need to be supported and help our kids be successful.
I mean, I should definitely probably know this, but how many board seats are there?
8.
And then what are the current professions of each of those board members? Like how many educators are actually on the board? How many are not?
So there's 8 board members. Most of them are over kind of in eastern Nebraska, and then the 3 over in western Nebraska start in Lincoln, and then there's 2 others kind of out in western. One of them used to be a mental health, like a school counselor over in Grand Island area. Now she is retired. One of them is a homeschool mom. One of them owns a bathroom renovation type company. One of them is an attorney over in Omaha. Our current board member, Patsy Co-Johns, is a retired teacher. Deb Neary works in advocacy, but I can't remember the organization, so I am not even going to try.
Nebraska.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm looking at the bios right now. You're doing great.
There was, let's see, Lisa Fricky, I believe, was also a retired teacher, and Patty Goebbels up in the Norfolk area works in at Wayne State College in higher ed.
And I think Elizabeth Techmeyer and Sherry Jones were also in education before, but not current, obviously. If you're on the state board, you cannot be a current teacher for the conflict of interest
Right.
issue, so. You had a question?
Yeah, Kristin, you had mentioned trusting librarians.
Yep.
Just curious on if you guys have views on how books and libraries should be chosen, or restrictions, or just sort of how you view that issue. I know it's a incredibly broad question.
Like I said earlier, I trust our librarians. Our librarians go to school very specifically to be media center specialists, and they also need to take a specific test to be certified. So I know that they are the expert in their area, just like I am the expert in my area. I don't expect my librarian to teach my math groups. She doesn't expect me to choose the books that are populating and the materials that are populating the libraries. So I trust our media center specialists. They know what they are doing. They are well equipped to choose materials that are age appropriate and beneficial to our students. I know that there has been a lot of talk around this issue lately, and it's become very controversial and highly politicized. Our school districts across the state do have policies and procedures in place. If there are parents or community members or teachers that are unsure or not in favor of certain materials that are in our library or that a librarian is providing. So there are ways that something can be challenged or brought to a district's attention if a parent or a community member is not happy with something that the librarian has chosen. But overall, I trust our experts. They are the experts. And I, as a parent, have a policy and a procedure to address that if I find issue with something.
I just thank you for that question, because the question just came to mind. I've never had a thought about. Do you know if the state board has library standards? Like we have science standards and math, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's just interesting to me, because we have science standards and math standards and language arts standards, and so it was just a question I think I should research. Yeah, I love the diversity in Lincoln, and I know that Lincoln is such a wonderful, welcoming place to a lot of refugee families. We've got refugees here from war-torn countries, and so I've been privileged to speak to the Sudanese community, the Ukrainian community. On Sunday I was talking to some Nigerian students from UNL, and so my heart always goes out to the most vulnerable students that don't have parents that would be able to advocate for them, possibly because they don't speak English, they might not read English. I've talked to teachers who are saying, I've got parents of my students who don't even read the written language that they speak. So in my heart, I think, what do those families whose parents can't advocate, can't choose the books for them, what do I want for them? So I go to Campbell Elementary once a week and volunteer there, and I ask the librarian, how many books do you have? And she said 24,191. Very exact number, so she cares a lot. She is the expert in her library. And so my heart is, let's have every book be safe for every child. Whether that child is here and they have two parents that can advocate for them, they all speak English, it's a stable household, or that child just moved in from war-torn Ukraine and their parents don't speak English and the child barely speaks English. So that's the policy. I would want the highest quality literature that's safe for every student, every book, every student. So it's like 7:15, just so you know, Ingrid.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, JJ might not think it's okay.
We're gonna be here till 9, it'll be great.
I do have, so speaking of standards and diversity, so LPS is very diverse, and really the state of Nebraska is becoming, I feel like there's more pockets of communities. I feel like a lot of times with schools, because the state test, every student is required to take them, regardless of whether they speak the language. So for certain schools, that school may seem like they're failing, but really it's because the large population that they have doesn't speak the language, and they still have to take the test.
And they're underserved with translators and.
Yes. Yes. So what are your thoughts, and this is for both of you, regarding not confusing a school, if that makes sense, that is actually failing versus one who is actually excelling and doing great for their students, but in paper, it looks like they're failing just because they have this particular population.
So I have talked to an LPS board member about this quite a bit. He's very passionate about it. And he talked to me a lot about our AQuest system, and that's what Liz alluded to earlier, is the system of ranking schools on great, good, excellent, is it excellent, great, good, needs improvement? And that system is in place for a reason. It gives a ranking to a school and kind of in a blanket way shows which schools need some support, but it doesn't get at the nuances of the school population. It doesn't take into account student mobility. It doesn't take into account ELL populations. It kind of takes into account special ed populations, but not in a very heavy way. And so looking at ways that we can equitably look at how our schools are doing without comparing a test score that isn't published until months later, that has no bearing on the class that's already moved on to the next grade level, and the teachers can't do anything about it then anyway. Looking at how we can kind of compare apples to apples and look at how a school is doing over the course of a school year, rather than how a school is doing last year compared to this year, because the population could be vastly different. Our students change so much. The tests that we're comparing in the fall is different than the tests that we're comparing in the spring. And so looking at ways that we can kind of make that more equitable so that we are looking at how a school is improving over the school year rather than from year to year can help us see where our gaps are and what our improvements actually are being made. And how we can adjust the NSCAS, the spring test, to be more aligned with the fall and the winter, so that we are comparing apples to apples and looking at who is improving over the course of a school year and which students are still needing more support. And then revamping that in the AQuest system that's published and is part of the state accountability, and it's needed for a lot of reasons, but making that more transparent about what is actually going into that system, making it more equitable to include our more diverse populations, and then making the testing, the actual testing, more comparable to some of the other tests that they're taking in the school year.
And with the NSCAS, do you get immediate results? Is there a test where you get immediate results?
The map, we get results 24 hours later. I know the NSCAS was coming out sooner this year, but they're not published and they're not put into the AQuest until months later.
Okay, and when is the map happen?
The map happens in the fall and the winter, and then NSCAS for third up is in the spring.
So, yeah, I think I was talking to a board member that was talking about, we want instant results so we can make changes as we go, not next year, okay, well, this is a whole new group of students. And I feel like similarly, it just reminds me of an LPS fundraiser for United Way, where I felt like it wasn't equitable because the school that gave the most money got the award. And I thought, we would all imagine which schools might be able to give the most money, and I would have loved to see sort of the proportionate, of whether it's comparing the free and reduced lunch program percentage to the amount given, those kind of things, because again, yes, we could be comparing apples to oranges to pineapples, and that's not fair for a school district to get ranked that way. That's not actually comparing apples to apples. So yes, thank you. I'm gonna look into that more. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Oh, as I promised, I'll stop asking.
You're so invested. I love it.
But I also had a follow-up to your answer before that I wanted to ask. With the books, I appreciate how you're saying you want every child to be safe, you want a safe choice for every child. In your opinion, is it the librarians who make that choice and determine what's safe for kids? Is it parents? Is it a school board? Is it the state board? How would you, I think Kristin, you said you would go by the librarian, but I was just curious, who you think should be making those choices?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yes, librarians are definitely experts and they go through a program. And I would like to say, I'd like to do more research because I don't know how they get told which books are recommended to them, honestly. I don't know if it's the American Library Association that's recommending the books. I don't know if they get books in sort of a package deal where you've got 150 books, and so you're, 145 of them are bestsellers and classics and wonderful, and then 5 of them are kind of just the new ones that I have no idea how who goes through that process. I will tell you that I was at the Lincoln Women's Fair in January, and I talked to multiple students who told me that the required reading that they'd had to do in school, they felt traumatized them. They could name books off the top of their head that they felt like when the teacher read this out loud to the entire class, I was so uncomfortable and I hated this, and then I had to read it out loud or I had to write about it. And so when I look back on my high school and my college career, like there were books that addressed human depravity and the darkness of the soul. I think of Heart of Darkness and Animal Farm and Lord of the Flies, sort of those classic. They're gritty and they address a lot of depravity, but at the same time they're not salacious or gratuitous with content. So when I look at the brain research and it shows that traumatized people, if you're reading a gratuitous, detailed account of trauma, it re-traumatizes your brain. I want to look at sort of the whole landscape and say, if we don't have library standards for the state, how are librarians making those choices? Because it is such a broad conversation in the nation, in the state, at the state board, at the legislature. It's a hot topic. So I'd like to take a look at, a variety of psychologists and brain research, and then who does make the recommendations for librarians. They're busy. I don't want to overburden them to expect them to read every single book, every year that they're ordering, and yet, what are the standards? What are the protocols? 7:25. Oh, he's got another one.
That was a follow-up. You had mentioned long ago, in the very beginning, that you've obviously met with lots of people, lots of parents, lots of educators, and you had mentioned that many people have, maybe they have opinions on certain issues that they've talked to you about that they don't see reflected from the board. And I was just wondering if you could highlight some of those issues that you think are not properly being represented for parents and people.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would say that most often it's parents who feel like their family's personal belief system is being contradicted or compromised when their child is at school. And if they would speak up to that, to the teacher, to the administrators, they don't feel like they're being heard or respected. And so I think a public school has to be everything to everyone. And so it's a challenge, right? We live in a pluralistic society. We don't want anyone's beliefs infringed upon. And so we want every student to feel safe at every school. And so that means, no bullying of anyone, no reason for no bullying of anyone. And also I think we want to be careful with controversial content that could infringe upon, we have the whole spectrum here. The whole world is coming to Lincoln, which I love. And so some states are looking at opt-in programs for that controversial content that might be sensitive to some families that have belief systems that they feel like are being compromised by that content. So I'd like to talk about an opt-in system instead of what Nebraska has right now, which is opt-out, which is, again, a paper gets sent home or an email gets sent to the parents, and you have to be able to read whatever language that's written in, or the child has to make sure they get the paper to the parent. Otherwise, the student's automatically in that program. And so lots of states are choosing to flip the switch so that the parent gets the paper or the email. Do you want your child to be in this content that may be controversial and may infringe on your family's belief system? And so then the parent gets to choose. Yes, this is my intent for my child because it aligns with our belief system. And I think, Lincoln is a welcoming place, and Nebraska more and more is becoming a welcoming place. And so we want to be respectful of families' belief systems.
But isn't the issue the same? Like if you can't speak the language, you wouldn't be opting in then.
Right.
Instead of all the education.
Yeah, so you said the main problem with them not being able to potentially understand the language and read the paper that comes home, then actually removes that child from ever being able to receive any of that content because the parent's not literate.
And so we'd have to define what controversial content is, right? And so I think the countries that people are coming from often have more conservative beliefs than the American belief system. I have a good friend from Oman over in the Middle East, and she came over to America thinking America was Hollywood, because that's what she saw, and she thought that she and I weren't going to get along at all because I would be just some flamboyant, I don't know, raucous character. And then she realized, okay, America has a diversity of beliefs, and so I think we have to look at, you know, opt-in versus opt-out. What are the benefits? Are we getting the majority of the parents what they want, or are we getting the majority of the parents who, like we said, culture has changed a lot. Parents are often not as present and not as involved as they were 18 years ago, 20 years ago. And so I think, are we erring on the side of we're sure everybody's fine with it, or are we going to err on the side of protecting the most vulnerable kids whose parents might not be okay
Do
with
you
it?
have thoughts on that? Do you want to repeat the question?
Yes,
Just
there we
got
go.
so far
Well,
away
I was
from the-
originally asking what you had mentioned that you saw, or had heard a lot of issues that were not being, properly reflected by the higher ups, the board, things like that, teachers, board, whoever. And then you, which I mean, you could have a very different experience, if you've had those. But I think then you started talking about, opt-in versus opt-out education, and I think that's sort of what
Yeah.
you were asking, like, do you have an opinion
I-
on that type of?
I think my initial reaction to that would be to encourage the diversity that we're teaching in our schools, and encourage our families to or promote the benefits of a diverse curriculum and a diverse set of books that we're having in our libraries, and you know, to reframe it in a way that we are wanting students to be included in these programs. We are wanting our students to learn a perspective different from their own. We are wanting to have our curriculum reflect what kids are going to be seeing in the real world, rather than framing it in a way that this could be bad for your kid. Do you want them to be a part of this? Framing it in a way that this is a critical skill, this is a critical set of curriculum that our students are needing. You have the choice to remove them if you don't like it. So I think my opinion might be opposite of Liz's on that one.
Yeah, I just had a question, like, how, when you talk about like opting out, and that just makes me really worried about like civil society, like, if you are opting out of even just knowing what other people believe, not that you have to believe it, but that you just don't want to hear about that, how does that raise adults who are going to work and live in a pluralistic society, be able to have debates, to be able to understand other people, if the entire time they've never had to hear anything about what other people believe? Because isn't that the goal of public education?
I can't imagine that extreme ever happening, but I think we need to define what controversial content is, or when that applied. And I think that's a robust conversation to have as well across the state. Thank you so much.
So I am yes. So I think we can probably have so many more questions, and thank you so much. I'm glad that there were a lot of questions, and thank you for taking the time to come.
And we left our information.
Yes, so both of their informations are here. So I know that was a lot of information that was said, and you might not remember, so you can take one of these so that you can see kind of, and I guess you guys have websites.
My website, my email, my social media,
Okay.
it's all
Yep.
in there. So
Yeah.
if you're
So-
wanting to ask more questions, please feel free to email me or reach
So
out.
thank you both, and like I mentioned earlier, you're welcome to stay or you can go. So Gordon, do you want to do the treasurer's?